Hi, everyone. Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and welcome to this week's author journey. This week, I'm so excited. I have a very, very, very special guest. It's Jo Parfitt, who is an author, publisher, and mentor, and was all of the above for me when I first met her way back in 2010, but we'll talk a little bit about that. She is the author of 33 books and is also the founder of Summertime Publishing, which was started in 1997. In 2008, she expanded into partner publishing and started Summertime Books. And she published her first book called French Tarts. And I want her to tell you that story when she was only 24. She's lived around the world and recently repatriated back to the UK. She conducts regular writing workshops and does retreats because, and I love, she said this to me from the very, very beginning, and I live this as well. She loves to share what she knows to help others grow. So please join me in welcoming Jo Parfitt to the author journey. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Anne. Lovely to see you. Lovely to
So
see
nice
you.
to see you. Long time no see.
Oh, I know. Not since
It's
Thailand.
it's been a long while. It's been a long while, and Thailand was so much fun. So Jo started with me at the very, very beginning of the Paradise Writers Retreat. So we'll dive a little bit more into retreats in a bit. But let's. Oh my goodness, all over the world. Where have you lived in the world, Jo?
France, Dubai, Oman, Norway, the Netherlands, Brunei, Malaysia, and
Wow.
England.
And I think when we first connected back in 2010, 2009,
Mm.
2010, you were living in Malaysia, I believe, at that time.
I was in the Netherlands in 2010. We went
Oh,
to
you were?
Malaysia in 2013.
Okay. So you came from there to Dubai and when we did the workshops together.
I did.
Again, way back when. Do you remember what workshop you were doing at that time?
I remember who was on it. I don't remember. It was. Oh, I think it was the article writing one.
You did, well, we did several, but
We did,
remember
yeah.
Spice? Do you
Oh,
remember
yes. Well, I still
Spice?
teach. That's what I teach in Tuscany every year. Write your
Okay.
life stories with spice. Yeah, I still
It's,
teach that one a lot
I
because
love
it
that.
works. Yeah.
I still have all my notes.
Mm.
I did from Spice. So I mentioned very briefly French Tarts, which was your very, very
Yeah.
first book. So give us a little the story behind French Tarts and how that became your first book.
Well, when I was at school, I really wanted to be a writer, and the school careers advisor told me writing's not a real career. Don't do that. Do French. You're good at French. So I did a French degree. And as part of my French degree, I had to go and live in France for a year. And while I was there, I was really lonely. I was the only young English person, of the only young person I knew. I was, what was I, 20,
Mm.
in this tiny little place in France. So I ate. And I used to and I used to wander up and down and look in the food shops and buy the food. And I was found myself staring in the window of a patisserie one day, and I just thought, French tarts, that's a good title. I'll write a book. So I was really lonely, as I said, and so I invited myself to dinner with all the people I met. So honestly, it was the man who ran the bicycle shop, my dentist, some of the teachers at the school, the mothers of people I'd bumped into. One of them was somebody we rented a property from a week, and I would go and stay, and I would say, please, can you give me a recipe for a tart, and I'll put you in my book. I was full of confidence at the age of 20. And then when I came back from France and finished my degree a year later, I then wrote a proposal, which was literally one recipe and a table of contents
That was brave.
and a cover letter. And it was
Mhm.
accepted by the first publisher I approached.
Wow. And so, I mean, is that how would you advise somebody who's watching us and has their first book and wants to approach a publisher? Does that
Well, it was easier in those days, I admit. It
Mm,
was easier. I would say if you're going to approach a publisher, there are just several things you've got to get right. One is you've got to have a good idea
mhm.
at the right time.
Mhm.
and you really need a catchy title. But
Mhm.
what matters more than anything these days, and most people hate me for saying it, but I'm right, and you know this too, Anne. If you don't have a following, you're not going to sell books. So
Mm.
you've got to have some sort of internet presence. You really need to start building your following, your social media followers, um,
Mhm.
way before you start thinking about a book, and then they're going to be interested in you, because these days publishers expect you to do a lot of the promotion. So you've just got to do that.
That's really good advice. And you started Summertime Publishing in 1997.
Mm.
So I'm sure you have seen a lot of change during that time. Talk a little bit about the biggest changes that you've seen in publishing.
Well, I started Summertime Publishing in order to write another book, which was another cookbook, and it was called Dates. And I was
Mhm.
living in Oman at the time,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to be published by a local company who they weren't really interested unless we came to it with a sponsor. And
Mhm.
so I just agreed from the beginning, I'll do this as a joint thing. So we got a local publisher to put their name to it, but it
Mhm.
was our ISBN. So that's why I started it, because I wanted it for myself, really. And we printed 3,000 copies, and we kept them in our garage or our attic. And I used to put on a T-shirt that said, make the date with a date or something. And I used to stand in school playgrounds as the mothers came to collect their kids, and go to American women's club fairs and British women club fairs and things like that, and go to the bookshops in person with them in my
Mhm.
car, taking them in there physically. When I got back to England, which was shortly after that, I wrote two more books: Career in Your Suitcase, which is now in its fourth edition and is my most
Which is
successful book.
fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, and Forced to Fly. And
Mhm.
this time I was in England, and so I published 2 or 3,000 copies. I kept them in my two-bedroomed cottage in a great big heap in the dining room, and it was the same thing. I used to write letters. I was constantly putting things in padded envelopes and going to the post office and posting them. I was
Mhm.
selling them by writing articles, getting the articles placed in publications all over the world,
Mhm.
anything I could think of, that might be interested, and I would do these articles. If I could get paid, I'd get paid. That was great. If
Mhm.
not, in
Mhm.
exchange for a byline at the end that just said, Joanna Parfitt, because I was Joanna Moore in those days. Joanna
Mhm.
Parfitt has written this book, and if you'd like to buy one, please email her at. And
Mhm.
that's how all the orders came in. And I sold out and I republished.
Wow.
And I did it all that way. And frankly, if I still think writing articles is one of the best ways to promote your books, except that
Mhm.
now people go online to buy them. And if you look
Right.
behind me, there are three shelves there of all. Well, there's a fourth shelf you can't see.
Uh-huh.
The books I've published. I've published for my clients now, um, 300 books.
That's incredible. And I mean, gosh, we could delve more deeply into the whole marketing piece. And what's
Mm,
fascinating to me is you were doing that before, like, the world was talking about, authors marketing their own books.
yes.
So it just seemed
Mm,
to be a natural progression. I know for myself, my background before, getting into, writing books and publishing was
mm,
in PR and marketing.
mm,
So it was a natural progression for me as well. But your background was in, studying French. So I think there's one little part of that, or probably a very large part, that just is what comes naturally to you.
yeah.
So, I mean, what I've got so many questions, but what is your advice to an author? Because you're absolutely right. 100%, regardless of what publishing path you follow,
Mm,
you have to be the champion of your book, regardless of what else
mm,
is going
mm.
on. So, what do you advise the people who aren't comfortable or really, don't have that kind of knowledge or drive?
Um, Well, there are several things I would suggest, and I'll try and see if I can keep them all in my head and then regurgitate them before I forget. One of them is, I think the most important thing is networking, and I think
Mhm,
it was because I was a networker that the marketing came naturally. Also,
mhm,
I am a writer, so writing came naturally as well,
mhm,
and I don't I have you have to be pushy because you have to be pushy trying to get the articles out there or whatever.
mhm,
But if you have a good idea for a book, that means you're an ideas person. If you're an ideas person, that means that you're creative. And if you're a creative, you'll think of creative ways to sell books. You just have to. It's by default. So
mhm,
so my advice would always be a networker. And I what I used to do, and it made a massive difference to me, is I used to first of all, I would always start a women's business group wherever I was living in the world.
mhm,
Secondly, I would start a writers' circle wherever I was living in the world.
mhm,
And those people within those groups then became my champions or my cheerleaders, as I call them.
mhm,
And so my cheerleaders would then almost sell the books for me because they'd tell everybody about me. And so
mhm,
not only did so I would start these groups, but I would then be on the board or I'd be the president or I'd run them because I wanted people to see me. And
mhm,
if you don't want people to see you, you're going to find it really hard. But I
mhm,
knew that if I wasn't in front of people, I wasn't going to get anywhere. But then the other thing I did, which was hugely important, was I would attend conferences. And I used to attend the Women's International Networking Conference, which was held in Italy and then usually in Switzerland. I
mhm.
attended loads of those. I would attend the Families in Global Transition Conference too, because I knew the people who wanted my books were at those conferences. But
Right. Brilliant.
I didn't
Brilliant.
just attend the conference.
Right.
I was a speaker. And because
Perfect.
I was a speaker, my books would sell. Now, the first conference I attended was the families in no the global. It was called Global Women or something. Women on the Move in Paris
Mhm.
in 1998, and I took my books in a box and I stood there after my talk and sold them out of my box. The first Families in Global Transition conference I went to was the same. I took
Mhm,
my books. I remember I was right at the entrance there, holding my books in a box and trying to sell them.
mhm.
Both of those conferences the following year had got a bookshop.
Wow.
And
Oh, that's amazing.
so the bookshop is what made all the difference. So that's what I would do. I would go and
Yeah,
speak at places where I knew I could sell my book. So
that's incredible.
it's all networking, it's all showing off, it's all standing up in front of people, and
Mhm.
that's my advice.
That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I mean, you talked about Italy and Paris, and everyone's like, "Well, I can't afford to go there." And you have traveled the world, so
Mm.
it's sort of a natural. But I want to encourage people to look for those kinds of opportunities within your own city,
Oh.
province, region. There's
Oh,
always lots
yeah.
going
There's
on.
always lots. I mean, when I lived
Mhm,
in amongst all this traveling, I lived in
mhm,
England for 7 years in the middle of all of that.
mhm,
So I would go to the Women's Institute or Rotary or
mhm,
the local business network, or
mhm,
I would also, because most of my books would have been to do with expats, I
mhm,
would also find all the American schools in England, all the international schools in England, and ask if I could go and talk there at their coffee
mhm,
mornings. I usually wasn't paid for these things,
mhm.
but it always was worthwhile.
But you were
So
able to sell your
talking the
books.
yes, so
Mhm.
schools, and women's networks were really where I would direct it. So I found it was just as good in England. It was just a hell of a lot cheaper actually, because I only had to drive there with a boot full,
Which means trunk, a boot
which
full.
means trunk.
So you pointed out your shelf in the back. You published 2 or 300 other people's books
Yeah,
and predominantly expats books.
yeah.
Do you remember whose was the first book that you did after your own?
I shouldn't I? I think it was Living Your Best Life Abroad by by Jeanne Heinze.
Okay. Okay.
I think it was probably that one because I can remember saying to her, "You're my
Mhm.
guinea pig."
Oh, and you know what? The books that you've published, are fascinating, and many of them are memoir. There's are
Mm.
some that are how-tos, and I actually, if you give me a second, I am going to share the expat bookshop so we can
Oh, yeah.
show folks. Um, hang on a second. Let me see if I've got this one. Uh, there it is. So talk a little about this, and what percentage of books you talked a lot about selling them from your trunk and selling them at events, and selling the 2 or 3 thousand. But again, fast forward, we've evolved. We
Mm.
live in a global world, and people we're talking to are online and through social media. So when did you start the expat bookshop?
I can't remember.
It was
Um,
a long, long time ago.
I it was
But
probably something like 2010. It was
okay,
probably around then. It was when I started doing print on demand, which was
okay.
2008.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2010, I ended up taking over a lot of books from another expat publisher, and
Mm-hmm.
it was probably then because he set up my first website.
Okay.
And he said, I mean, the first one of these.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was probably around about then when I took over 35 titles from somebody else.
Oh, wow.
Um,
And I remember that. And I think what year was 2010? I think that was about the time that we started working on At Home in Dubai
yeah,
together.
yeah, it was about the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
you
I
were
think,
starting the shift from, because our contract was a traditional contract, and you
mm,
started shifting to the partner publishing
yeah,
model. And I just want to share with everybody who's watching, and with you, you have always been ahead of the curve. Like, do you forecast trends? Like, what is it that has created this evolution for you? Because the online bookshop, to me, began way before that was a more common way of purchasing books. You established a partner publishing model before that was the thing. When I started OC Publishing 7 years ago, I called it partner publishing, but now what we do is being referred to more as hybrid publishing.
yeah, it is.
So
It is, yeah.
what are your thoughts?
I don't know, why am I ahead of the curve? All I know is that I tend to have ideas for titles. So Expat
Mm-hmm.
Bookshop came about because I thought Expat Bookshop was a good name for a website, and that was
Mm-hmm.
really how that started. Um, went into print on demand because I noticed that another publisher I knew, because I'm a networker, I knew another
Mm-hmm.
publisher was doing it, and that was the
Mm-hmm.
publisher who I took all those books over from in the end. He
Mm-hmm.
was doing print on demand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. But it took me a number of years to pluck up courage. And so the first book I did print on demand, I did was my book. It was a book of my poetry,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a
Was that
student.
before Sunshine Soup?
Yeah, it was 2008 was the
Okay.
first book that
Okay.
I print on demand. Sunshine Suit was 2011, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something like that, that I wrote that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I had started doing, then I started doing it for other people from
Mm-hmm.
2008. So Jeanne Heinzer was about 2008, but she was before I was print on demanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think probably Tina Quick with the Global Nomad Guide to University Transition, which is actually our most successful book ever. I think
It's huge. Yes.
yes, that
Yeah.
was the one that I first did print on demand. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Say that title again. Global
The
Nomad.
Global Nomad's Guide to University Transition.
And that's huge. And you mentioned earlier that families in global transition,
Mm,
which is like an annual event. It's an international conference. It draws huge numbers
mm,
of expats,
mm,
and that is sort of and you're a regular speaker there as well. Um, so you are also in demand as a mentor,
mm,
and let's talk a little bit about the benefits of writing retreats. And I mentioned a little earlier that Jo and I met when I lived in Dubai. I had started a writers group called Flamingo Writers. And the very first time that we met was on Skype, and you joined one of our writers meetings, and it was so much fun, and the conversation was just just electric, and everybody was firing questions at you. And at the end of it, you're like, Anne, if you want, I can come to Dubai and do some workshops. So it just kind of evolved from there.
Mhm.
So my role was putting butts in seats, and you did your
Mm.
workshops. And fast forward, and then I moved to Thailand, and you very, very graciously came and joined me in Thailand to do workshops there with me when I started the Paradise Writers Retreat. Then I really got bitten by the bug. I thought this really is the way to get people excited about writing, to
Mm.
get them, working, making progress on their works in progress. So talk a little bit about your annual retreat
Hmm.
in.
Well, my annual retreat came about because in 2007 I knew I wanted to write a novel. But I'm not too proud, and fiction wasn't my thing. So I attended a writing retreat, the one went to was at Castle of Park in Scotland near Aberdeen,
Oh, oh.
and it was wonderful. And the people who ran the Castle of Park, Bill and Lois Brecken, then sold the castle and moved to Italy.
Mhm.
Because I'm always prepared, because that's the sort of person I am, when I was at that retreat learning how to write novels, I gave Bill and Lois a copy of a book I'd written called Release the Book Within. And
Oh,
I said,
yes.
just by the way, this is what I do. I am a publisher. I am a writer. Fiction's not my thing. So here's a book. If you ever want somebody to do a retreat, here's my book. And in 2012, actually, they got in touch and asked me if I'd go to their new retreat center in Tuscany. And so I went in 2012, and I ran my 1 week workshop, How to Write Life Stories with Spice.
Mhm.
And it's just the best thing, having people on location, away from their families, away
Yes.
from the other things that the other things they have to do. And it's always lots of teaching,
Mhm.
and they also have homework every day, just as you
Mhm.
do, Anne, and yours. They
Mhm.
have homework every day, and then what we do always, and I can't remember if you do this too, but I'm sure you probably did. We meet over cocktails
Oh,
or
yeah.
towards cocktails to read and give feedback on the work that they've done while they were having their afternoon off, which wasn't
Okay.
off at all.
We
And
usually do
so
that before cocktails, so
well, we do it just before, but it
Yeah.
sometimes moves into cocktails,
Yeah.
and so that is fantastic. There are usually between 10 and 13 people on these workshops,
Awesome.
and they learn a lot, but we go out for lunch most
Mhm.
days, or we go on trips. It's just excellent, and it's just lovely. People can really indulge in it,
And
and it's so good. But I do
and the
want
one
to add,
thing.
sorry, I wanted
Oh,
to
go
add
ahead.
one other thing that we did this last time, which was really made such a difference. And it was only because you can go to this retreat in Tuscany. It's called the Watermill.
Mhm.
You can go and you can take a partner with you, a non-paying participant, they're called. It doesn't have to be a partner, it can be a
Mhm.
friend.
Mhm.
Non-participating partner, sorry, I got the name wrong.
Mhm.
Non-participating partner. There were so many non-participating partners on my last one that I said, why not invite them all when it's the feedback session? And that was incredible because all those people were not just reading to the safe group.
Mhm.
They were
Mhm.
reading to others who were judging them, like their
Mhm.
husbands or their friends.
Wow.
And the way they grew because of getting positive feedback
Isn't that
from
incredible?
people who weren't on the course was
Yes.
exceptional.
And what I'm finding, and I think that you've mentioned this to me before, is when you do it year after year, and some people keep coming back, but then the people who have attended your retreat and
Mm,
those who have attended Paradise Writers then are part of a bigger group.
mm,
So, you've got some beta readers, you've got, other resources that you can pull from. Once somebody has been on one of my retreats, then I become one of their beta readers, and that's part of a benefit to participating.
mm.
So you do things ongoing with your retreaters as well, correct?
I do. I offer to look at their manuscripts for them. but
Mhm.
I charge them for it.
Mhm.
And I also, not always, but if they've really gelled as a group, I've then run another writing retreat in England.
Mhm.
Usually, actually, I think I've run. Oh, I have run one in Holland as well, but I run something from my home for those people who want to come back and have a short a weekend reunion,
Excellent.
which is very good value, and so they
That's
can have
awesome.
some follow up, which is
That's
really nice.
fabulous.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a book that you wrote called Release the Book Within.
Mm.
Is that still in print? Can people
It
get
is still
that?
it is, but it's changed now because
Okay.
what I decided to do was I often repurpose everything I do. So if I've
Mhm.
written a book, it then becomes a workshop, and then it perhaps becomes something else, and then something else. So
Mhm.
so my original book, Release the Book Within, was based on a workshop called Release the Book Within, and so
Mhm.
then I turned the Release the Book Within book into a Release the Book Within workbook. And so
Oh,
then it
excellent.
became a workbook made of 8 lessons.
Mhm.
And then I turned that into a 6-session online by Zoom class for 4 people, which I've run. I started to
Mhm.
run these things during COVID, and it worked really well for people writing their books in a very small, safe group, and they
Mhm.
all became beta readers for each other, and it worked really brilliantly. But,
Mhm.
6 months ago, I became quite ill with Lyme disease, and so I had to stop teaching all the things I was teaching online. It was just too much. So
Mhm.
now I run Release the Book Within in a I suppose it's its 4th incarnation now, maybe it's 5th, where I now run it one-on-one with
Oh, good.
students.
Okay. Well, and I'm very, very pleased that to see that you're recovering and and you're back with a
Mm.
vengeance. So again, if people
Yeah,
are
yeah.
interested in learning more about these workshops that you are doing, they can see on your website at joparfitt.com. Um, and
Well,
talk a
I
little bit
think
of,
they may be on joparfitt.com.
okay.
They might
Tell
not be
me.
on joparfitt.com because I dropped the ball when I was ill, so they might not be
Oh,
on.
but there's a way that
They
they can
should be.
reach you through joparfitt.com, right?
Yes, they
Okay.
can, they can. There is a calendar on joparfitt.com, and the retreat should be on it, but I can't guarantee it because I'm
Okay.
afraid illness was not good.
Okay. Well, I just got a little message. Barb is watching. Hi, Barb. Shout out to Barb Miller, who
Oh,
you
hey,
you know
Bob.
from
Hello, Miss Miller.
Thailand.
I do, I
And Joe, we
do.
have someone watching us from Nunavut, James Simone, who's also an author. And he says a good drink or two helps me with wine writing too. I wish I could do it in a place that wasn't my living room.
Yeah,
Thank you very
well,
much, James. So before we run out of time here, talk a little bit about what's the difference between summertime publishing and springtime books.
okay. Summertime Publishing was the first one I formed, first publishing company I formed, and it published anything. But then in about 2014, after I had had a burnout, because I have been known to work way too hard, I then took on one of my authors, actually, Jack Scott, who wrote a
Mhm.
brilliantly funny memoir
Perking the
called Perking the
pansies.
Pansies.
I love
Perking the
that.
Pansies. Um, I then asked him if he would like to be my business manager and
Mhm.
be in charge of all the stuff I don't like. So all the publishing, all the administration, all the invoicing, and all the paying of royalties.
I still get the
And
odd
so
royalty check. Thank you very much.
so anyway, so he then took over, and he was doing lots of he wanted to be working on books that weren't expat, because although he'd lived in Turkey for a short while, he didn't feel like an expat and
Mhm.
started to get in other titles. So he decided he would start Springtime Books. So we are both involved with both of them, but now
Mhm.
Summertime Publishing focuses on expat and
Okay.
Springtime Books focuses on everything else. You get
The others.
exactly the same service. It makes absolutely no difference. It's just the ISBN number on the back.
Mhm, mhm. And it
All
it
it is.
does it's like an imprint, sort of springtime is an imprint of
Yeah,
summertime, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so if somebody is watching and they have that story within them, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them before they sit down to write, or even if they've started to write?
The main thing I would say is join or start a writers' circle. I think that to have a support group of people who are your peers is incredible, and
Mhm,
to get feedback and to share gets you brave. And you only know you're any good if you share. And if you
mhm,
don't share, you can just be working in a vacuum. So
mhm,
starting a writers' circle is for me the most important thing. And it's not that difficult to start one. If anybody's interested, you can download in the tools section of the website how to start a writer's circle. And if anybody wants to talk to me, I have written 40 lessons that could be available to people because
awesome.
I've been running writers' circles for a long time.
And you're doing one online? Did you
Yeah, I
start
run
a
one
writer's circle?
online.
Mhm,
I started several during COVID, but
mm,
now I've only kept the one on, and then I run
mhm.
one live as well. Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody wants to learn more about Jo Parfitt, summertime publishing, or springtime books, I've got the websites up here. Take a look. Send Jo a note. She is so full of amazing advice and information, and she'll
Thank
tell you
you.
like it is, too.
I'm afraid I'm Honest Joe. I'm known as Honest Joe, so you will always get the truth from me.
And that's awesome. And I can't believe it's been such a pleasure to have you on today, and I so appreciate it. And I hope everybody who is watching today and who watches the recording has gotten some really great advice from a longtime author, publisher, and mentor. So thanks again, Jo, for joining me. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Anne. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It was
Thank
just a
you.
pleasure. And that's it for this week's author journey. I hope you enjoyed learning more about publisher Jo Parfitt and her company's Summertime Publishing and Springtime Books. And we hope you'll join us next week on the author journey when we'll delve deeply into another story. So for now, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.